I'm very conscious of the effect of payroll tax. It is an important part of income into the budget that does fund things like roads and bridges and hospitals, but it does need to be well balanced with the pressure it puts particularly on small business. Queensland has, despite all of those economic problems we've had in the last couple of years that we've shared with other parts of the world, we have not touched payroll tax. We have not increased it, we've actually kept it. We have the lowest payroll tax in the country and we have the highest threshold. So there are fewer businesses in Queensland, percentage-wise and in total, paying payroll tax than anywhere else in the country, and those that do pay it pay a lower rate than anywhere else in Australia. And I think that's been a very important competitive edge that we've had and has helped to protect small businesses. But that doesn't mean that we can't do better, and I take on board what you're saying. It is a balance, as I've said, about everybody here would have ideas about what we can do to improve the city and the region, and we need to make sure we've got the income that will underpin that investment. But I can tell you that we have worked very hard. Whenever we went through all of the difficulties in our budget, we never touched payroll tax, because I understand exactly what you're saying about the impost it can mean, particularly on the smaller and medium-sized enterprises. So the other thing we did was give a rebate, 100% rebate for apprentices, so that we could encourage people and support them. And I know that doesn't apply in every single business, but apprentices and trainees not only qualify to not be counted on your payroll, but you get a rebate if you have actually employed them on other employees. So if you're not familiar with that and you could be using that, we're very happy to give you some more information. The sort of rail lines that are being talked about are 400, 500, 600 kilometres long. So they go through a lot of different land holdings. Some of them will be Crown land owned by the state, and we can allocate that for a public, for a purpose like that. Some of it will be privately owned land, owned freehold by farmers or other owners. Some will be Crown lease, that is big farms that are leasing it from the Crown, which will also have compensation rights. Some of that land will have native title rights on it, and the companies will have to negotiate with the recognised traditional owners of those native title areas. So if you think about a 400 or 500 kilometre corridor, then the land negotiations are quite complex, but regardless of whether you're a native title owner or a farmer with a freehold title, all of those different forms of tenure and title are regulated by law, and people's rights have to be recognised, and if they're not, they have a recourse to the courts. So I think the companies, and most mining companies that I've identified, they usually make a decision about how much it will cost them to fight it in court and how much it will cost them to buy it out, and these things generally get settled out of court, but it's important that people have those rights to do that. I've remembered the question that I forgot, or not forgot, but got distracted from, and that was the question about the AAA rating. The first thing that has to be done is to return our budget to surplus, and this does go back to the question that was asked about payroll tax, which is, we do have to keep finding, I think, responsibly, that balance between income and expenditure. We have a very clear, solid plan to return to surplus by 2014. That's outlined in our budget documents in our most recent mid-year budget update. Campbell Newman and his team have no plan to return to surplus, and they currently have $5 billion of unfunded election commitments. I think about $4 billion of which are slated to be spent in the southeast corner of the state. So $5 billion of unfunded commitments, no plan to return to surplus. In that environment, then you just start to think about what might have to be cut by way of services or projects, or what might have to be increased by way of taxation to pay for those commitments, or those commitments will get shelved. We are blessed with some of the most unique environment in Australia and on Earth, and protecting it, I think, is a very important obligation that we have for the future. We do have huge potential for further development, and we've got to get that balance right. I've increased the target that we're aiming for, and that is to have 7.5% of Queensland protected by National Park, and we're well on track to meet that target. During the 3 years of my term as Premier, we've allocated a further 500,000 hectares of National Park, some of which has been in Cape York, I think, in a very unique way, where we've handed the land back to native title owners in a joint arrangement where it becomes national park and they get management rights of the park. So it creates an economic opportunity. It has the people who know the land best looking after it. It I think, has a justice outcome in terms of people having the recognition of their title to land, but preserves it forever for all of us. So there is some great work happening there. Some of you may not know, but know the Stradbroke Island. Stradbroke Island is to the people of Brisbane and the southeast as Magnetic Island is to the people of Townsville and the north, just off the coast, a lovely family holiday area. We passed legislation last year. The island was only 2% national park. We've passed legislation to phase out sand mining on the island. It's now 50% national park, and it will grow to 80% as each of the mining leases close down. So it's a phased exit off sand mining. It's part of the sand islands like Fraser Island. It's a very unique environment. We passed legislation in the Queensland Parliament to protect it, to phase out sand mining and declare it systematically as national park. Campbell Newman came out a couple of weeks ago and said that an LNP government will revoke that legislation and sand mining will continue. So, you know, I do think the environment is a special responsibility of governments, and I'm very concerned about the potential to see a wind back on the reef protection legislation. There's already been indications from the LNP that they will wind back on that world first protection of our reef from runoff, that they'll wind back and they'll revoke the wild rivers legislation. So in a number of areas, the protected estate is at, I think, a great deal of risk under an LNP government. It seems to me that there's a number of opportunities that we need to do more work with on bringing people either directly into the far north, into Cairns, giving them a chance to experience the region and the North Queensland region around Townsville, and then maybe fly out of either Brisbane or the Gold Coast so that they've had that whole experience. There are a number of, there is some really important work happening at the moment with New Zealand in relation to a potential route like that, and we're continuing to work with a number of the Chinese airlines. As you will all be aware, the love affair that Japan has had with Queensland for a long time has been absolutely critical to our tourism industry. We need to make sure that as more and more people from China have more and more opportunities with the growth in their economy and the industrialisation of their nation, that they get more leisure and they have an emerging middle class, that they fall in love with Queensland. And I think we're a pretty easy place to fall in love with. So yes, I can assure you that there is a lot of work happening so to make sure that we pick up those growing tourism markets. But it's equally important to make sure that things like the cruise terminal get a slice of that action for places like Townsville. Cruise tourism is actually the fastest growing tourism in the world. More and more and more people taking up cruise holidays, and you can't get a slice of that action unless you've got a terminal. You may or may not be aware that we did actually look at a terminal for the Gold Coast about 4 or 5 years ago. That became very controversial, and ultimately the Gold Coast, it became impossible. People were opposed to it, and then some of the environmental work didn't really stack up. But that's a real advantage that I think Townsville has. You're about to have a fantastic new facility on a berth that will be world class, that people will get off into a welcome reception area that will be a great welcome to Townsville. And the job then is for Townsville and Townsville Enterprise to make sure that those people who get off that boat have a sensational time while they're here. And if you can do that, then they'll keep coming back, and word of mouth will make a big difference.